Hi there. Today is Careers Q&A Day, where Zoe and I give you some personal attention.
Today's question comes in from Diana, who's working in a large-scale organisation and asks us, we're a huge business. How can we embed career conversations in a scalable way? And we love this question because it's where the conversation often goes next. You know, it's one thing to say we need better career conversations, but it's another to actually make that happen across hundreds and sometimes thousands of people. Because the ultimate goal here isn't more process, it's better conversations happening more often. Of course, for first principles, we would say adopt one ring to rule them all, because it's important to have a model and a framework for career conversations that is scalable to make it easier to adopt and monitor. Being specific about what you want the conversation to look and cover makes it much easier to quality assure the outputs you get across a large number of people, all of whom can then use the framework to create a culture of career conversations. So, how do we start doing that?
When it comes to scaling career conversations, particularly in large or complex organizations, I think probably the first thing to say is this. You don't scale career conversations by making the conversation bigger. You scale them by making them much simpler and easier to do, so more people want to participate in them. Because I think in a lot of organizations, the approach to this is kind of like a process problem. Where do we put it? How do we capture it? Do we need a new platform for it? Should we find a new framework? What's the form that we want them to fill in? But a good career conversation isn't a systems issue, although, of course, thinking about where the information from the conversation goes and, more importantly, what you and they do with it, it's actually a behaviour issue. It's a culture change issue. So if managers aren't already having meaningful conversations of this kind, then adding more structure around it just creates more noise, more stress, and risks turning it into a tick box exercise. So the goal isn't for you to build something really complex and sophisticated that requires a large scale investment. It's to start off by making a few really simple behaviours incredibly consistent across the business and embedding that in, and then adding new layers of complexity once you've got the business benefits and the buy-in established. So the first thing to really think about is scalability is about making a simple behavioural change and seeing how that beds in, and worrying about the process a little bit further down the line.
Yeah, I think you're right, Erica. And there's something, isn't there, around if we want to embed at scale, we've kind of got to move our mindset from this is an event, like a career conversation is this event thing that I have to do, to a career conversation is more of a habit. And it's something that feels embedded in my kind of muscle memory almost. It's just something that feels completely natural to me. So it's not something that happens once a year out of a formal review, but that it does show up regularly in small, really sort of like, really human moments in time. So let's give you some kind of three practical levers, if you like, to think about to start you off. When we talk about the simplicity, about not overcomplicating it, I think the first thing would be, number one, is to give managers a few simple and practical questions. Think of it as like a conversation scaffold, if you like, rather than a sort of 20-page framework. And I think that's probably a mistake that many companies will make, is that they'll over-engineer this, where then it becomes just more load on the manager in terms of more documents, more complication that they don't need. So, three sort of simple questions that you could offer to managers as part of that scaffold might be something like, what does success in your work look like for you right now? Might be something like, what experiences would you like in the next 12 months? It might be, what would you like to do more of or less of coming up in your work? And how can I support you best? Like just really nice, simple openers that kind of get the conversation going. And if those questions are asked more consistently across the organization, you'll transform the quality of those conversations overnight, I would say.
Yeah, those are great, simple questions. And I'm thinking about things like making sure that you're building in some kind of existing rhythm for where and how career conversations happen. Again, you think about in a large scale organization, the amount of like decisions and obligations and responsibilities that it's easy to get decision fatigue. And so the more that you can take out of the experience complexity that requires decision making, the more likely it is that more people are going to adopt it. So have a think about your existing rhythms, whether they are monthly one-to-ones or quarterly check-ins or project debriefs. And indeed, sort of offboarding or onboarding for development programs can also be good times to do this. And just think about, where might I embed 10 minutes of a conversation? Where might we encourage or just set out as protocol a conversation around careers takes place here? Because like anything else, like when you're planning, your your team meetings, for example, it's much, much better to put them in at the beginning of the year and everyone have them in the diary than it is that every single time that you meet, you need to find the next date and the next date. Because scalability is going to come from frequency of interaction and the adoption of it by as many people as possible. So really just think about taking some of the decisions out so that everybody has both a question set and a time and place for that to take place.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think like the third point kind of follows on nicely from that then, Erica, and then it's about the measurement. So measuring the conversation, not just the outcome. So a lot of companies will spend time doing engagement surveys and scores and retention data, but not necessarily measuring whether the conversation is happening in a kind of frequency that we're aiming for. So, measuring like with people that they have had a career conversation in the last 3 months, that they feel that their manager understands their aspiration, that perhaps off the back of those conversations that they might have identified some simple kind of goals to try to meet over the next 3, 6, 12 months. So if we get that measured, then we start to see that regularity of output from it. And it again becomes a rhythm, to your point, Eric, about getting them scheduled in, capturing the outcomes from them, get them scheduled in, capture the outcomes. So we get a kind of rhythm to it. And that repetition will then become the culture.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about when we've done sort of at scale embedding, like also where to begin. So there are a couple of ways to do this. So some organizations go, okay, this is what we're going to adopt and this is our expectation. And we do a kind of town hall and like full guns blazing broadcast where it's kind of, this is done for you. This is what it looks like. This is what's expected. This is, how it's going to work and what we'd like to see. And that's one way. So, loud and proud, inclusive, everybody involved at the same time. And other organizations have worked with us to go, let's identify a kind of pilot group or a pilot division or a target job family and get it working well, the wheels spinning there. Maybe that leader's particularly well disposed to the value of career conversations. Maybe there's a lot of hard to find talent over there. Maybe there's high flight risk and high attrition, and you want to see if you can stem that and then tell a good news story. So it either can work. You'll know best about your culture, but it may be that you find a particular place to pilot or several places or environments or audiences to pilot where it really makes sense. And then you've got a good news story for replicating elsewhere and sort of cascading, embedding the process. And look, most managers haven't been trained to do this. So also remember that it's not just managers who can be the cohort of career sounding boards. Often managers have been promoted for their capacity to deliver and their expertise, and not always for developing people. You may have a very sophisticated manager development program in which everybody goes through, but you also may not. And even if you do, we still want to be able to support people to continue to grow into their confidence to have these conversations and to know how to handle some of the things that may well come up that might make them anxious, whether it's that there's a pay freeze at the moment or that someone might want to move completely out of that person's field and that might be outside of their comfort zone and zone of knowledge. So we really need, alongside the kind of methodology, we also need some permissions. We need to normalize that it's okay to have an imperfect conversation, to be intentional and to get better through practice. We also need to give our coaches and our managers permission to not have all of the answers or to have to say yes to everything, and really to learn to focus on listening rather than fixing, so that ownership around careers is really with the individual and they feel that autonomy to drive it, but that it's nurtured and supported by the person who's listening to them and kind of supported by the business. So it isn't about like having a perfect planned conversation. It's really, first of all, about making the person in front of you feel seen. And for them to be willing to engage with that, you may want to have a cohort of people to talk to that goes just beyond their managers.
So I think if you're in an organization thinking about this, the takeaway really is to not try and scale complexity, to keep it simple. As Erica said, to think about what would work best for your organization. Is it a sort of let's go all in and get everyone talking about this at once? Or should we try a pilot, something small, and test the water first? Think about some few simple, good questions that you can offer out to managers that and others that are having those conversations that can be repeated and become part of that muscle memory of easy ways into the conversation. And make sure that you are supporting managers and those having these conversations about how to actually listen and not to feel obliged to have the answers and a magic wand to make their wishes come true. And to remember that creating culture and building culture isn't created alone just by having fancy frameworks. It is about the conversations themselves and them happening consistently and at every level throughout the organization.
Yeah. And then that way it doesn't feel like an initiative that could like be a flash in the pan. It just becomes part of how things are done around here and a continuing dialogue around the philosophy and ethos around work and careers in your organization and how we make that happen.
And I think what we'd say finally is to choose a model, choose a simple framework and make it consistent. Start with a simple set of questions, build that confidence and rhythm, perhaps even start with a pilot to test. And why not chat to us if you do want to explore this further? We'd be more than happy to dive in and find out what you're up against.
So I hope that's been useful and we really enjoy answering your career questions. So please do keep sending them in. And it's very simple to do that. You can record an audio of your question on your phone and then you just email it to us. Or you can type out an email. Either of those, we don't mind, although it's always lovely to hear a voice because it tells us that our listeners are real. And you can keep it anonymous. You don't need to tell us what organisation you're in, just use your first name. And it can be an organisational question like the one you heard today, or it can be something personal to you and your career or someone that you're trying to support. Just send them in to pod, P-O-D, at thecareerequation.com. And who knows, we might be hearing your voice on here sometime soon.
Take care.